Today, I'm finishing up the repairs to the rusty floor on my very rusty 1980 Toyota long bed I bought for just $600. First, I'm cutting out a repair panel from the leftover replacement floor panel that I didn't use all of in the last video. This curve was too tight to cut with the cutoff wheel, so I used the aviation snips. I trimmed the curve down perfect using a bench grinder, and then cleaned it up using the wire wheel. First test fit wasn't that great, so back to the bench grinder for more trimming. Second test fit still needed some more trimming. Third try needs a little more. Fourth time is a charm. After cleaning all paint and grease from any edges, I started with some tack welds, using a hammer to help line up the edges where needed, and then went back and fully welded them in. So I've installed 3 out of the 4 seat bolts here, and the 4th one I can't install yet because this is a new floor pan section here. And as you can see, it's not exactly flat. So I'm gonna have to heat this up and hammer it up from the bottom to get this angle to match the angle of the seat. BFH. There, that's better. Now I can drill a hole. Punch. The last thing I need to do here is to weld this nut upside down on the bottom, but I'm gonna do that when I take the cab off of this frame because I'll have a lot better access to clean and make sure this is welded securely because this does hold in the seat, which is a pretty important function. So I was just chipping back some of this additional sound deadening here, and I found this ugly area. A whole lot of rust. And then what I thought was surface rust over here, it turns out once I chip back some of the sound deadening, the chisel goes right through it. So that's some more areas I'm gonna have to repair. I'm skipping a lot of details to keep this video short, since I already made a full-length how-to video on replacing rusty floors a few uploads ago. If you're looking for a full how-to video to learn every step from start to finish, check for that link in the description. Well, the more I chip into this here, the worse it gets. This is like a cavity that goes like down inside under the floor, and I can feel rust up to about maybe this area. I guess it goes all the way down to here, I don't know. And this over here is pretty bad as well, also goes up the back wall. So I can try and fabricate all this, but let's head over to the parts truck and see what kind of sheet metal the floor in that truck has to offer. And the parts truck has become more of a trash bin lately, but it's looking really good over here. Some surface rust over here, but nothing nearly as bad as the Ohio truck. All right, I've just been chiseling out sound deadening for a while here, and here's what I've got to work with. This is pretty solid metal. There's some surface rust up here, a little bit here, but it's all very light. In fact, it doesn't really get that bad until you get over to this very edge. So we're solid up to right about here. Good metal. Now let's go look at the Ohio truck. And over here, found some more stuff I didn't like. In addition to these big bad areas right here, I've got a soft spot here, got some rust right here. Chisel almost went through. I've got a big nasty area of pretty bad surface rust right here. All this up here is on the lighter side, so I can just grind that down and refinish it. But right about where this floor stops being rusty and turns into nice metal over here is the opposite of what's on the other truck. So that floor from the donor truck will once again work out perfect for the Ohio truck. How many times will I trip the breaker? If you guessed 6, you're correct. Next, I used a hammer and chisel to break some of the stubborn areas loose. And then the cutoff wheel. And then the Sawzall to cut through a couple of thick seams where multiple pieces of sheet metal were spot welded together. Next, I used the cutoff wheel to get more precise and trim off the extra fat. So I'm getting these edges cleaned up and just trimming off the fat. And there's a lot of metal over here. I ended up using the Sawzall to cut through all this. I went ahead and cut this 1-inch strip off from the outside because it has all this extra bracing underneath, and I don't want to deal with having to cut all that on the blue truck. And remember, on the blue truck, I had a rust hole right here, and I put my finger inside there, and there was a cavity. That is this extra piece of bracing right here. So I'm glad I have this intact from the parts truck. Next, I cut the floor out of the blue truck using the cutoff wheel and Sawzall. I didn't use the Vever plasma cutter here because even though it's a lot faster, I haven't been using it long enough to be as precise as I am with the other tools. All right, so here is the bad section cut out, and I did manage to avoid cutting through this really thick bracing right here. The way this is built is this floor and these reinforcements are all rolled into one seam. It's about 4 pieces thick over there. And then this is just a piece of sheet metal back here. Now let's go look at the pieces I cut out and I'll show you my plan. So first of all, look at how much undercoating was on this thing. I think it's almost thicker than the sheet metal. Take a look at the back side here. The back side of this cab wall here is literally just a piece of sheet metal that goes down and it gets spot welded into the floor, which has a 90 degree in the bottom here. Now I know the limitation of my fabricating skills, and getting this with this pinch seam here and this all cut out from that truck for this to fit perfect is going to be tough because I've got multiple angles here. So what I'm going to do is drill out these spot welds, pull off this back piece of sheet metal, and focus on just the floor pan for right now. And then when I pull this cab off to put onto the clean southern frame over there, that way I'll be able to access this area from the back, and I'll weld in a new piece of sheet metal as needed. It's just going to be easier to focus on the difficult, more complicated part first, getting these angles and these curves to match on the floors, and just worry about this flat piece of sheet metal last when I have easy access to get it from the back side of the cab wall. First, I got to work drilling all of the spot welds on the outside edge using a spot weld drill bit. There were a couple more on the top edge of the pinch seam. Then I used a chisel to break what was left of the spot welds and separate the two pieces. And found one more spot weld that I missed. Now it was time to do some more trimming. And test fit. And more trimming, and test fit again, and a little more trimming, and another test fit, and some more trimming. I was happy with the inner edge. Now I needed to remove some material from the other side. Notice, I started off with a cutoff wheel, then a bench grinder, and next, an angle grinder. As I get closer to a precise fit, I'm using tools that remove less material. It's easy to rush after so many test fittings and remove too much material near the end of the process and be left with too large of a gap. Now I'm using the angle grinder to clean off the worst of this surface rust, as well as clean up the edges I'm going to weld. Then I went back over the areas with surface rust with a smaller sanding disc on the drill to get in all the tighter, hard to reach areas that I couldn't grind clean with the larger angle grinder. And finally cleaned up all of the edges I'm going to weld with a worn down short wire wheel. And then cleaned up the surface rust on the existing floor with a coarse knotted wire brush attachment on the drill. And then followed up with a short wire wheel attachment for all of the smooth and easy to reach areas. Next, I cleaned the surface with prep spray degreaser and sprayed it with a rust converter and let it sit for 30 minutes. I went over the full steps of using the rust converter in the previous video of this truck when I replaced the rocker panel. Link to that one is in the description. After the rust converter changed the surface into a black oxide primer, I cleaned everything with soapy water a couple of times. And that left me with a surface ready for primer. Next, I cleaned the edges, and it's time to weld. I didn't get the placement perfect on the first try, so I round off the tack welds and tried again. The anvil worked perfect for holding the floor down in place while I tacked everything in. So here's how it's going so far. I have it all tacked in around these three sides of the perimeter. This is going to come later on when I have access to the rear of the cab. This plate right here is a lot thicker than the sheet metal for the floor, so I am turning up my settings here to get better penetration on this thick piece here. I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. Now my next step is going to be using the grinder and taking these welds down nice and smooth, almost flush with the floor, and then I can spray them with some self-etching primer and go over them with some seam sealer to ensure that if there's any tiny pinholes, like there might be right there or right there, that those will be sealed on the inside and outside. If this was exterior bodywork, I would need to grind these welds to be perfectly flush and smooth. But because this is a floor pan that will be covered up by a vinyl floor liner, I'm just knocking the high points down to make it more smooth for applying the seam sealer later on. Alright, I'm done grinding down the welds. Notice I didn't get them perfectly flush, and that's fine because there is going to be a factory vinyl flooring over top of this, so you won't notice it. The next step is to go back over it with a wire wheel one more time, and I can see on some of the edges next to the weld, not so much on this side. Over here, for example, you can see real close, there's some dirt and just some burnt edges next to the weld just from the heat. I'm going to go through and grind that down, get it down to nice, clean metal, and then I'll be able to apply the etching primer. And here's a newer wire wheel here, but these newer ones will actually flex and bend a lot, which kind of makes them a little bit less aggressive. When they get worn down like this one here, this is what I like to use because these don't have any flex and they will cut through a lot more than a newer one like this. The short wire wheel didn't reach into any low areas, so I went back over the welds with the longer wire wheel to ensure all my surfaces were clean, bare metal. All that grinding and wire wheeling made a mess, so the next thing I need to do is get the shop vac and vacuum all the dust, dirt, and metal shavings. Now that I have all the dirt and metal dust and little pieces of metal vacuumed up, I'm going to clean the welds with some degreaser, and I'm going to use a lint-free cloth for this not a paper towel, because the paper towel will get caught on all the raised edges of the welds and tear off little pieces. And if you run a degreaser like I did, some Duplicolor prep spray or some caliper cleaner will work just as well. And once the degreaser has dried, it's time for some self-etching primer. And this is ideal for bonding to bare metal. So anywhere there's a weld or any bare metal, this is what you want to put over it. I just went ahead and cleaned up all the bare metal I had from the rocker pin replacement as well. So now is also a good time to throw some self-etching primer on that. Then I sprayed a second coat to be sure all bare metal was covered. And here's how it looks after 2 coats of self-etching primer. All my fabrication work is now protected from surface rust. Now I can finally move on to stripping the parts truck down to its clean southern frame and swapping the cab and engine over from the rusty Ohio truck. Thanks for watching.